Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. Here are some of the stories we'll be bringing you within the hour. Massive 7.7 magnitude earthquake wreaks havoc in Myanmar. Workers fear trapped inside a 30-story building after it collapses in Bangkok, Thailand's capital. Plus, US President Donald Trump assures Muslims in the United States he'll be there for them. Let's begin the world today. So, rescue teams are on the ground in Myanmar following a 7.7 magnitude earthquake that hits the central part of the country. The epicenter of the quake was about 20 kilometers from Mandalay, Myanmar's second largest city, where the last monarch, King Thibaw, resided until 1885, when the British took over the sovereign. Mandalay is Myanmar's commercial hub and is also the cultural center of the country, which borders a number of countries, including China. Aid agencies have been assessing the humanitarian needs in the country and working out how to respond. The quake was felt all the way in Thailand, in China, and in India. Here's a picture of what people on the ground are seeing: cracked roads, collapsed buildings, and one member of the rescue team saying the damage is enormous. Let's cross over into Thailand, which perhaps has become one of the only other countries to really feel the impact of this quake. A massive 30-story building still under construction collapsed as soon as the quake hit. At least 81 construction workers are missing at the site, and the number of deaths so far is still unclear. But we understand authorities have been able to establish 3 people died at the site, 68 people injured, 5 of them in critical condition. Thailand's Prime Minister Pengotan Shinawatra has been at the scene of the building collapse. She spoke to reporters earlier, calling for calm. There's pitch darkness in the city right now, which has already entered into nighttime. Only the lights of rescue workers still on as they continue the search for what is left of the collapsed building. We're also getting updates on the number of dead, some in Myanmar. Right now, at least 144 people have died, 732 injured. The military says 96 people have died in Nai Pito, 18 in Saigon, and 30 in Mandalay. Myanmar has been in political turmoil since a military junta seized power in a 2021 coup. It's been rather difficult getting information out of Myanmar. We're currently relying on the BBC now for updates to the stories in the aftermath of the quake. We understand mobile phones in the affected areas have been spotty, but tens of thousands of people live without electricity. There's limited access to internet. Foreign journalists are also rarely allowed to enter officially due to a lack of press freedom. The quake has added to Myanmar's current economic and political challenges. It's a country that has seen decades of unrest and military rule since its independence from Britain in 1948. In 2011, it appeared to move away from this, and free elections were held 4 years later, which Aung San Suu Kyi won. That's the military junta, detained and charged Ms. Suu Kyi and other members of her government, making allegations of widespread fraud in a vote held months earlier when her National League for Democracy party won more than 80% of the ballot. A coup triggered huge protests, with thousands taken to the streets daily, demanding the restoration of civilian rule. Violence quickly escalated between civilian and the military, and the army responding with brutal force used tear gas and rubber bullets against the crowds. More than 3.5 million people in the country have been displaced by clashes between the military junta and rights groups and citizens. Food insecurity has also reached unprecedented levels in Myanmar. Today's quake will no doubt add to the suffering of the country's 50 million people. The junta has now declared a state of emergency in multiple regions and made a rare request for international aid. Away from the earthquake in Myanmar, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance is in Greenland with his wife Usha, visiting the U.S. Pacific Space Base in Greenland's northwestern coast. A trip has been scaled back from original plans to tour the island more widely after a row with the governments of Greenland and Denmark over a lack of invitation. U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to take over the Danish semi-autonomous territory. Both Greenland and Denmark's governments have rejected the calls, and an opinion survey from January suggests a vast majority of Greenlanders are against the idea. The Pacific Space Base in northern Greenland exists due to a mutual defense agreement between the United States and Denmark. Pacific is located in Greenland's northwest coast, 750 miles from the North Pole. In 1946, the US and Denmark jointly established a radio and weather station near to where the base currently sits, and construction of the base, secret at the time, began in 1951. Many Greenlanders appeared relieved by the American government's decision to scale back the original plans for the visit by the vice president to the capital, Nuuk. The center of the town is set to be teeming with police and American diplomats, and the tension, the stress the visit has caused in such a small town is hard. The White House said on Tuesday Vice President J.D. Vance would join his wife, Usha, in Greenland, but the couple would only spend a day there visiting the U.S. space base on the northwestern coast. Denmark welcomed the changes to the original trip, with Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen saying the decision was very positive and that Denmark had nothing against the Americans visiting their own base. Although Vance will become the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit Greenland, a visit to a U.S. base is less controversial than the original plan for his wife's visit, which Greenland's acting head of government, Mute Egede, called a provocation. And why does the U.S. President Donald Trump want to acquire Greenland, either by direct purchase, economic pressure, or strategic pact, or outright annexation? Well, since 2019, President Trump's overtures have been rebuffed over the years, but his efforts continue. Greenland is a self-governing territory of Denmark. A member of NATO, leaders of both countries have pushed back against Trump, saying Greenland is not for sale. A January poll of the island residents showed 85% do not want to be part of the U.S. Trump has said he wants Greenland for national and international security, given that Russia and China have presence on the island. Greenland is an island nation roughly as big as Alaska and Montana combined. It has a population of about 56,000 people. That's nearly the same as Carson City in Nevada. About 80% of Greenland is covered with ice, some of it a mile thick. Most of the island is inside the Arctic Circle, which is being transformed by climate change. The nation's economy is based on exports of fish and shrimp, along with economic support from Denmark, but that could change as the Arctic ice begins to melt. Well, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth says Washington will enhance its military alliance with the Philippines to re-establish deterrence and counter China's aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. He was making the comment during a press briefing in the Filipino capital, Manila, on Thursday. Hegseth also stated that efforts to enhance Manila's military capabilities are part of an ongoing $500 million commitment, which will see Washington deploy Nemesis anti-ship missile systems and highly capable unmanned surface vehicles to the region for military drills in April. The press conference follows China's recent warning to the Philippines regarding its military cooperation with the U.S. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said nothing good will come out from opening the door to a predator.
And I'm quite proud of what our forces in CENTCOM did on that initial series of very effective and devastating strikes, and the ongoing campaign that we are undertaking, because that is again, on the backs of 4 years of deferred maintenance and failure and weakness of the Biden administration, we are reestablishing deterrence. And as the leader of that department, my job is to advise and work alongside the president and then work with my fellow cabinet members to ensure that we're operationalizing in every way possible, reestablishing that deterrence. So we will ensure the freedom of navigation returns to that part of the world, just as pertinent to our conversation today, freedom of navigation is something the Philippines experiences in the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea. It's something we take very seriously.
I believe that the Philippines should not be a mouthpiece of any other country. You know, that's once again the product of a limited worldview, of a closed society. We don't practice propaganda in this country. We practice free speech and democracy. So the Philippines is not a mouthpiece, unlike they themselves, who are mouthpieces of Xi Jinping thought.
We're in the UK now as car firms are seeking support from the government. As hopes fade, a deal can be reached with the US President Donald Trump over US tariffs. Companies met with Industry Minister Sarah Jones this morning to discuss their response to plans for 25% tariffs on US car imports from next week. The UK government is trying to negotiate exemptions from a wide range of US import levies due to come into force at midnight of April 3rd. But some car companies believe it's now too late to delay the measure and instead want to discuss support options. Insiders with knowledge of the well-attended online meeting said car firms outline the challenges they face, saying tariffs come on top of other pressures such as zero-emission vehicles mandate. US tariffs could have a huge impact on the UK economy, with the government's official forecaster estimating that in a worst-case scenario, taxes could reduce economic growth by 1% and wipe out Chancellor Rachel Reeves' £9.9 billion headroom against her debt rules. Government sources said there is still all to play for in negotiations over the 25% tariffs placed on the car imports into the US ahead of next week. Meanwhile, King Charles has been seen in public for the first time since he went to hospital after experiencing temporary side effects from his cancer treatment. He cancelled a trip to Birmingham today on medical advice after spending a short period of time in hospital on Thursday. The 76-year-old monarch left his London residence, Clarence House, on Friday morning to spend the weekend privately at his Highgrove estate in Gloucestershire. His diagnosis was announced in February last year, but it's not been said what type of cancer he's had. The palace has not provided details on what the recent side effects were. A palace source, however, described the most recent health development as a most minor bump in the road that is very much heading in the right direction. The king was taken to the London Clinic Hospital in central London by car and was not joined by Queen Camilla during the brief hospital stay. He was said to have been feeling good Thursday evening, carried out some work and shared dinner with the Queen at Clarence House. I want to bring in immigration lawyer and international affairs analyst Dayo Fadino to join us in this conversation on the UK. Dayo, thanks for joining us on the program.
Good afternoon, and also good afternoon to your audience.
Okay, if you could just sit still, if you don't mind, the picture's shaking. Let's talk about the tariffs that are looming ahead of the UK economy on April 3rd. Those tariffs by US President Donald Trump only begin in just a few days. How is the UK preparing for them?
As a matter of fact, I'm not very clear and sure whether the UK is quite prepared for what will be coming, if indeed the tariffs are introduced on the 3rd of April. I'm not too clear and sure whether they're prepared for this. This very threat has been looming for quite a while. I think Donald Trump made it very clear in January that that's what he's going to be doing, that he's going to be introducing tariffs to all imports coming into the US from different parts of the world. He made it very clear that it would be applying to China, Canada, the EU, and and the UK. Well, it seems that the UK is not particularly prepared for this. So the consequences of this, until this has been introduced, we do not know what the consequences will be in the nearest future for the UK.
So, if we don't understand what impacts they could have also on manufacturing firms in the UK, what exactly is the country preparing for? What's this all about? We're hearing about seeking support from the government. What kind of support can the government provide for UK firms if they really don't understand what sort of tariffs will be imposed on them?
That's again, as I stated earlier, the confusion and the fact that the government is not too clear as to what they're going to be doing, the fact that they've not been prepared for this, despite the fact that they saw this coming, whatever support. So if you're not really prepared for something, I'm not too clear and sure what support the car industry in the UK would be asking from the UK. I mean, the support is the fact that the car industry in the UK, if this tariffs actually kick in, the US is the biggest buyer of cars from the UK. I think in a year, the kind of amount it commands, the UK actually selling cars to the US comes to roughly about 9 billion. And if these tariffs are introduced, it would affect the market. It would affect the British share of the market in the US, because many people would not just be able to afford buying these cars. There will be clear inflation concerning the selling of these cars. And one other thing I could just see happening is, if these tariffs indeed kick in, it would be a gift to China, because what China would then do is then try to exploit that very particular market that the US has always had, and they'll be ready to actually sell cars at a cheaper price to the EU and to Britain and to other parts of the world. So I mean, the consequences are very are going to be very high indeed. The dire consequences, and the in, as of last month, the car industry and what's going on in the world right now, that the car industry lost shares to the tune of about, I think, 12%, just because of the fact that they've always been these threats of tariffs being introduced, to the UK and to so many other parts of the world.
Indeed. And I think that Prime Minister Keir Starmer does appear to have been avoiding having this conversation over what the US tariffs will be, and then Britain's retaliation to this. He said before the UK will not be retaliating these measures. Has he changed his position?
So far, I don't think he has. But his stance and his position right now will be untenable. If indeed the US decides to introduce tariffs to imports coming from the UK into the US, there's no way we would then just be able to actually sit by and allow the US to at least introduce tariffs against UK imports and him not retaliating at all. Although he has made it very clear that he does not want to start a tariff war in between the US and the UK. But if indeed Trump carries out these threats, it would not be reasonable for him to actually sit by, and not do something in form of some retaliation for this not to actually affect the UK at all. Um, the UK might possibly have to introduce equal tariffs to so many products coming from from the US. They cannot just sit by and not do anything about this. So the fact that he made these threats, or the fact that he actually stated clearly that he doesn't want this tariff war in between the US and the UK, things would change drastically if indeed the Trump government introduces these tariffs on the 3rd of April. just in a few days' time.
Could he also be trying to manage the relationship with the US because of Ukraine? The fact that Europe still needs American support in helping to stop the war and also warding off Russia.
Well, I think it's quite clear to the whole world now that I don't think Trump's government, the U.S. government, and the EU are on the same page as far as the Russia-Ukrainian war is concerned. They're on different pages. So I can't even see any form of cooperation in between the US and the UK anymore to do with the Ukrainian war. Um, they are on different pages. The US has made it very, very clear that they would want this war to stop. They are doing all they could to at least negotiate some terms of agreement in between the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Europeans. The EU and the UK are very, very gung ho on wanting this war to continue because they've vowed and they've pledged that they will continue to supply arms to Ukraine. So they are not on the same page regarding this. So whatever negotiation the British government is now trying to broker or to possibly pacify the US government to at least try to be in cooperation with them when it comes to the Ukrainian war. I cannot see that happening at all. So that's not going to happen, and it's just unfortunate that this tariff situation will kick in on the 3rd of April. But
Yeah.
the war, the Russian-Ukrainian war, would not truly really make any difference at all.
Yeah, and other countries such as Canada have turned their focus from the United States to Europe. I mean, we heard the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney say that the relationship with the US existed before no longer exists. Going forward, Canada, we were looking towards new partners, and he made his first trip to France earlier in the week, last week. As a result of these trade tariffs by the US. Will the UK now be strengthening its economic partnership with neighboring European countries?
Well, it's the way things are going right now with the type of government we have in the US at this point in time, and the fact that we're going to be having this, the American, Trump's government in power for the next four years. Honestly, the UK would have no choice now than to be in cooperation with other EU countries. Um, they're out of the EU, but unfortunately, they would now have to at least, unite together with the EU and trade together. Buy most of their products from each other instead of concentrating on the US to be the only country they could actually sell goods to. And they would also need to reach out to so many other countries too. Big countries like India, China, and do as much as possible to sell most of their products to these countries instead of just relying on the US for the sale of many of their products, cars and including so many other products that they send to they sell to the US. Yes, they need to be in full cooperation with the EU now. Unfortunately, they're out of the EU, but they now need a very, very close tie and cooperation with the EU to be able to at least fend off some kind of trade deficit and damaging British trade in the UK. They would have to, whether the UK likes it or not now, to cooperate fully with the EU.
All right. Let's talk about King Charles III's health, which took a concerning turn this week. How do Britons feel now that he's left hospital? How are they reacting to seeing him for the first time outside of hospital and going back home?
Well, the whole country is quite concerned about King Charles. The whole country is also very, worried about what could be happening. We are not too clear of what kind of cancer he has. It's not been disclosed at all. But the fact that he had to go back to the hospital because of the after effects of the treatment is indeed very concerning. He's now out of hospital. He had to cancel most of his engagements, no doubt, because of the fact that he had to go back to hospital. He's now out of hospital, and he now needs to take things very, very slowly and not too heavily. Yes, the bits are very concerned about him, and the bits wish him all the best, and they wish him well, and they just hope that he recovers from whatever treatment he's going through right now to do with cancer. And they wish him and his family the best, really, concerning his health and his recovery.
The royal family has gone through a really rough year, haven't they? King Charles's cancer, as well as Princess Catherine, also in remission right now. Apart from, the thoughts and prayers with the families, how else are people perhaps expressing their good wishes for the royal family at this time?
Well, their best wishes are always, they've always expressed their best wishes for the royal family. The royal family is still very, very popular in the UK, and they just pray and hope that Prince Charles actually gets through this and recovers fully. The popularity of the royal family in the UK is in no doubt. It still runs at possibly about 90-95% approval of the British people. And they wish that family well. The anti-monarchies do not stand a chance, really, in terms of actually trying to witch the monarchy heel or whatever. That popularity is still there, and they will continue to have that popularity. And the British people will continue to pray for King Charles and his family, and for that very particular monarchy to survive as long as possible.
Dio Fadina, we appreciate you joining us on the program today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, in another development, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to impose tariffs on the automotive industry and warned of a potential response with similar measure. He was speaking in Tokyo on Thursday. Lula is currently on an official visit to Japan, responding to the recent tariff measures announced by Donald Trump on Wednesday, which imposes a 25% tariff on all imported cars starting April 2nd. Lula announced that Brazil will first appeal to the World Trade Organization, and if that does not resolve the issue, Brazil will apply the law of reciprocity and also impose tariffs on U.S. products. In his view, these tariffs could harm the U.S. in the long term, causing an increase in inflation and economic contraction. He also believes that such actions damage multilateralism and free trade globally. Coming up after the break on The World Today. The United Nations welcomes reports of commitments made in Saudi Arabia between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine on the Black Sea Initiative. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. Germany is calling for a tougher stance in the face of more global import tariffs from the United States, this time on car imports into the world's largest economy. For more now, we're joined from Berlin by the DW correspondent Cassandra Sunt. Cassandra, what tariffs from US President Donald Trump are we talking about this time?
Well, these 25% tariffs are specifically targeting cars and light trucks imported into the United States. They'll go into effect on April 2nd. That's less than a week from now. And then there's another round of tariffs already being discussed for parts for automobiles, and those will go into effect in May. But these April 2nd tariffs are aimed at countries that Mr. Trump sees as responsible for the bulk of the United States trade deficit. There was previously a question about whether these tariffs would go into effect. but President Trump has confirmed that they are going ahead on his social media platform, Truth Social. Now, just to put this into perspective, the United States imported $474 billion worth of automotive products into the country last year, including about half that in passenger cars. Now, the biggest suppliers are really close U.S. allies, including Mexico, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and of course, Germany.
And what has been the reaction from leaders of the targeted countries, Cassandra?
Well, now that it seems crystal clear that these tariffs, which had been talked about for weeks now, are indeed going into effect, leaders are really not happy. Here in the EU, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said that the move is, quote, bad for businesses and worse for consumers. The German Economy Minister Robert Habeck has said that the levies will harm the US and the EU and global trade as a whole. And the new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has labeled the tariffs as a, quote, a direct attack on Canadian workers. He has said that retaliatory measures are being considered, but even as a countermeasure is being discussed, President Trump has said that, quote, far larger tariffs are on the cards if the EU and Canada unite to do, quote, economic harm to the United States.
Just wondering what the business reaction has been across Europe.
Well, what was most shocking to me when I woke up Friday morning here in Europe was how many U.S. auto stocks tumbled on Thursday. The notable exception being Tesla, which is run by President Trump supporter Elon Musk. But right now, companies have to make a decision about whether to onshore production to the United States or accept that tariffs are just a part of doing global trade now. Ferrari, for example, has already announced it will raise prices. They make all their vehicles in Italy and said the cost of some models will go up by as much as 10%. But turning to the markets, the investors are clearly flustered. European car makers, including VW, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche, and Continental, lost 5.5 billion euros worth of combined market value on Thursday. Investors seem to be panicked at the prospect of more costs and complexity in the European car market. Don't forget, this is an industry which has already seen many hits. They've been struggling with the slow ramp up to electrification, high logistics costs, and they're being completely outmaneuvered by the EV industry coming out of China. But specifically here in Germany, known for its automobiles, of course, the president of the German Association of the Automotive Industry put out a statement that said that the tariffs, which would take effect on April 2nd, will have, quote, negative consequences, especially for consumers, including those in North America, adding it could send a fatal signal for free rules-based trade.
Interesting times we're in, Cassandra. Thanks again for joining us. We're still in Europe, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claims Russians are dinosaurs who just want to eat us, meaning Ukrainians. This was during a bizarre briefing following Coalition of the Willing talks in Paris on Thursday. In his words, it's just that Putin wants war. What can a person who wants war say in peace talks? I'm not the kind of person who will sit and remain silent or swallow all his narratives. I'm not interested in his ballets in Crimea, his red caviar, and so on. I don't know if he will surprise someone else in the world, but for me, they are dinosaurs. You see, they just want to eat us. We have to defend ourselves. Zelensky's words. He also claimed Russia and Putin specifically was the only blockage to peace, saying he's not ready for direct negotiations. We're not scared. I'm not scared of any negotiations. Zelensky previously passed a law banning direct talks with Putin, while Moscow has been holding discussions with the United States on Ukraine and bilateral relations. Ahead of the talks with a number of EU leaders, France's President Emmanuel Macron and the UK's Keir Starmer backed a peacekeeping force in the event of a peace deal in Ukraine, although other countries have not committed to it so far. Meanwhile, the Russian President Vladimir Putin claims that Russian troops have taken control of 99% of the Luhansk People's Republic and more than 70% of the Donetsk People's Republic, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, while touring the Anglo-Helsk nuclear power submarine cruiser in Murmansk on Thursday. Russia has held 3 rounds of talks with the US, while Washington and Kyiv have also taken part in bilateral discussions. A temporary ceasefire was agreed on energy strikes, although both sides accused the other of breaking it, as well as a Black Sea ceasefire. Moscow launched a military offensive in Ukraine late February of 2022 after recognizing the independence of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, claiming that Kyiv had failed to guarantee their special status under the 2014 Minsk Agreement, and urging Ukraine to declare itself officially neutral and give assurances it would never join NATO. President Putin said the economy also in Russia is stable and growing at 4.1%. He was speaking to sailors on the submarine as well, saying Russia is the 4th largest economy to the world in terms of purchasing power parity. China is the first, then the US, then India, then Russia. All the others, including Japan, Germany, and so on, are lower. I'm not even talking about the United Kingdom. They keep coming at us, acting aggressively, but their economy is, I believe, the 9th or 10th largest in the world. Hence the size of their armed forces. How many people are there? 170,000 or 180,000? That's all the UK armed forces have, according to the Russian president. The Russian leader also claims that the influence of Ukraine neo-Nazi group in Kyiv has continued to grow. As for EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Europe will not be removing those sanctions on Russia, but will keep up the pressure following a meeting of the so-called Coalition of the Willing in Paris, vowing the sanctions will stay in place on Russia. The EU chief explained that conversations between European leaders have focused on how to step up support for Kyiv, both financially and militarily. After the United States reached a partial ceasefire deal focused on protecting energy facilities with Ukraine and Russia following talks in Riyadh, the parties are also reported to have discussed measures to ensure safe navigation in the Black Sea.
We had a very good meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. The Coalition of the Willing has gotten bigger, stronger, and very determined. I've basically 3 key takeaways. The first was a broad discussion on how to step up in the support for Ukraine in the short term, financially and military-wise, the military needs that are there in Ukraine that have to be fulfilled, but also the financial needs. And here I can contribute that we will front-load the EU part of the G7 loans for Ukraine. Second topic, keep up the pressure on Russia. It was very clear that the sanctions stay in place. What we want is a just and lasting peace agreement. That is the goal. And the third key takeaway was on the long-term support for Ukraine and our own European defense posture. Here, of course, the Readiness 2030 plan is crucial. It provides up to 800 billion euros of defense investment possibilities for the member states. And this means, for example, joint procurement with Ukraine in the European Union, but also in the Ukrainian defense industry. It's strengthening the defense industrial base of Ukraine. And of course, we need also a credible deterrence and defense posture in the European Union. And thus we have to develop our own defense industrial base too.
EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Now, intense hostilities in Gaza continue amid devastating humanitarian conditions. Markets in Gaza cities appear empty of goods and food supplies amid economic hardship and a renewed phase of the war the residents are facing. According to its latest humanitarian situation update on the Strip, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, that's OCHA, stated that humanitarian efforts are crippled as the ban by Israeli authorities on the entry of any supplies has entered its 4th week. Most requests requiring coordination with Israeli authorities have been denied. With the depletion of food supplies and deterioration of water and sanitation conditions situation, there's high concern of increased malnutrition and warnings of nutrition clusters. According to OCHA, the food security sector reports that cooking gas remains available only in extremely limited quantities and at exorbitant prices. This is limiting food preparation by families and increasing their reliance on community kitchens. A surge in demand for bread has also been observed in recent days, given the soaring prices of fuel and wheat flour. Amid dwindling supplies, widespread insecurity, and critical supply shortage, FSS partners are working to maximize the production of cooked meals across Gaza and increasing bread production at bakeries that remain operational. The United Nations has welcomed its reported commitments made in Saudi Arabia between the United States, the Russian Federation, and Ukraine on securing freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. Spokesperson for the UN Secretary General, Stefan Dujarric, noted at a press briefing recently that the UN has been working consistently, especially following the letters the Secretary General sent to President Zelensky, Putin, and Erdogan on February 7, 2024, which outlined a proposal for safe and free navigation in the Black Sea.
The Secretary General welcomes the discussions and reported commitments reached in Saudi Arabia by the United States, the Russian Federation, and Ukraine. Reaching an agreement on freedom of navigation in the Black Sea to ensure the protection of civilian vessels and port infrastructure will be a crucial contribution to the global food security and supply chains, reflecting the importance of trade routes from both Ukraine and the Russian Federation to global markets. The United Nations has been working consistently, especially following the letters the Secretary General sent to President Zelensky, Putin, and Erdogan on February 7th of 2024, putting forward a proposal for the safe and free navigation in the Black Sea. The United Nations also remains closely engaged in the continued implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding with the Russian Federation on facilitating access of Russian food and fertilizer to global markets to address global food security. The Secretary General's good offices remain available to support all efforts towards peace. The Secretary General reiterates his hope that such efforts will pave the way for a durable ceasefire and contribute to achieving a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace in Ukraine in line with the UN Charter, international law, and relevant UN resolutions, in full respect for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity.
In the meantime, the World Food Programme says the Democratic Republic of Congo is facing its worst hunger crisis ever, with 27.7 million people in acute food insecurity. Jean-Martin Bauer, WFP's Director of Food Security and Nutrition Analysis, says this is an unprecedented level, the highest on record seen in the country. The food crisis is being fueled by a sharp escalation in violence and instability in eastern DRC, which has triggered widespread displacement, disrupted trade, and paralyzed banking systems. 3.9 million people are now classified in IPC Phase 4, emergency levels of food insecurity, with the situation especially dire for internally displaced populations. Compared to the last IPC analysis, the number of people facing acute food insecurity has increased by 2.5 million.
The data shows that 27.7 million people in the DRC are facing acute food insecurity. This is an unprecedented level. This is the highest level on record that we've seen in the country. Since December, we've seen these accelerated displacement in the east of DRC. We've seen a disruption to trade and markets. Banks in the east of DRC have been closed. That's causing a liquidity crisis that's having an impact on commodity prices. It's having an impact on people's ability to survive and to implement their livelihoods. The insecurity is also affecting farming in the east of the DRC. So the situation is bad now. It could possibly get worse. Give you the highlights again. 27.7 million people in IPC phases 3 and 4 in DRC, 3.9 million in phase 4. The problem is concentrated in the east of the DRC. The IDP population, the internally displaced population, is quite affected. And we've seen an increase of 2.5 million people since the last time we did an IPC in the DRC.
Yeah, pretty bleak picture. I'm talking to you from Kinshasa, the capital. I have spent time in Goma, and it's really hard to basically understand the fact that this isn't also a new crisis. This has been going on for decades. Others will tell you that, you know, they are now having to sell what little they have to find food. Many will go without food to feed their children. They're forced into malnutrition, higher risk of disease and mortality. Let's not forget that we already have cases of Mpox, more than 80,000, and cholera, more than 7,000. Crime has reached an alarming level. We have seen that security has just paralyzed the local economy. And as Jean-Martin mentioned, you know, banks are shuttered, shops are shuttered. And, you know, this has had a massive knock-on effect on the local population, who are just also living in this climate of fear, of deep uncertainty.
Still ahead on The World Today. Now, where else in the world can you find snow this time of the year? I'll tell you. It's all the way in Abha, Saudi Arabia. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. Thousands of protesters gathered at Habermas Square in Tel Aviv on Thursday as pressure increased on the country's leaders to stop the war in Gaza and bring back the remaining hostages held captive by Hamas. Massive crowds were seen cheering and applauding as they waved Israeli flags and held portraits of hostages. Tensions escalated later as police clashed with demonstrators while dispersing the gathering. Demonstrators were led by the Defensive Wall Forum and Kaplan Force, as many called, for the resumption of the ceasefire and protest against the firing of top government officials. The death toll in Gaza's hospitals now has risen to 673, with an additional 1,233 injured since the resumption of military operations on the dawn of Tuesday, March 18, according to the latest update from the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. The renewal of military operations in Gaza comes 58 days after the implementation of a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, which had included an exchange of prisoners and hostages between the two sides. U.S. President Donald Trump has addressed Muslim Americans, saying, "While I'm president, I will be there for you," as he praised them for record numbers of support in the 2024 election in a speech at the White House iftar dinner in Washington yesterday. President Trump reaffirmed his commitment to the Muslim community, highlighting his administration's dedication to Middle East peace through the Abraham Accords, an initiative he called impossible to achieve but now gaining momentum. He also joked about the heading home after working long hours, as his staff reminded him about the dinner plans. He said, "As soon as I found out who they were, I said, all right, that's okay," Trump proclaimed after he wished Muslims around the world a heartfelt Ramadan Mubarak during the event. Ramadan is the 9th month in the Hijri calendar, and is considered one of the holiest months for Muslims, during which they fast from dawn to sunset. As the end of the month approaches, preparations for Eid al-Fitr begin, bringing joy and widespread social gatherings.
Every day we're keeping our promises to the Muslim community. My administration is engaged in relentless diplomacy to forge a lasting peace in the Middle East, building on the historic Abraham Accords, which everybody said would be impossible, and now we're going to start filling them out because, as you know, Biden did nothing to fill them out. He did absolutely. We had the 4 great countries, and nothing happened. despite the importance of the Abraham Accords. But I have a feeling it's going to fill out very quickly. People are talking already about it. We should have had them long ago. It should have been done. The Muslim community was there for us in November, and while I'm president, I will be there for you. I'm going to be there for you, and I think you know that, and our two great mayors understand that. I said that I would see you after, and I saw you after, and I think you're doing better than we are. You're doing better than anybody. So it's so great. I'm so glad you're here. But as we approach the end of Islamic holy month of Ramadan, we're also deeply honored to be joined by many of the international friends and partners, including the ambassador from Saudi Arabia to the United States, a very, very special woman, Princess Rima. Princess, thank you. Thank you, Princess. Great. Say hello to everybody. It's great to see you. You know, we have long days, not like other people that had this position. I work long hours. And I said tonight, after making 3 calls for people running for office, they call them teletown halls, and they're not easy to do. And I said, well, now I go home and can relax. They said, no, you can't, sir. You're seeing your friends from lots of different places, and that's okay. As soon as I found out who they were, I said, all right, that's okay.
Back here in Africa, volunteers in South Africa are providing purified water to fasting Muslims in Johannesburg amid an escalating water crisis. It's Ramadan relief for many of the people benefiting from the service.
Muslims in Johannesburg, South Africa, organized an initiative to provide bottled water to locals observing Ramadan amid an escalating water crisis in the city.
Some areas don't have actual clean water, like purified water. They have water that comes out from the taps, but it's so grey that it's not possible for home or domestic or personal use. So that's the reason why we took this initiative to supply the water as well.
Johannesburg has been struggling with a severe water crisis since 2015, driven by poor water management, drought and climate change. Nearly half of the city's water supply gets lost before reaching residents, with some going for days without water.
There is a need for this water in the smaller musallas, especially in the rural areas, in the underprivileged areas. The reason is they have a lot of water shedding, and the problem is sometimes at iftar time the water shuts down. So that's the reason we have also decided to give the smaller musallas an opportunity to distribute this water. And they use it for iftar, and some musallas even use it for the Tarawih prayers.
Volunteer Tamanda Nyirenda works at a bottling facility, purifying and filling water into bottles for distribution. The packages are delivered into the Sprit View and Uwais Karni Islamic centers before iftar time, while Muslims break their fast.
This masjid, alhamdulillah, every day more than 55 people, they are coming for iftar. So there's people, they are coming from poor area, they don't have food in their houses, they don't have anything. So when they get here, iftar and eat, alhamdulillah, they are helping people for iftar in this water, because you know Rasulullah said, one who give you water, who is fasting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant him, will forgive him, and also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant him Jannah, inshallah.
Rand Water, a major bulk water supplier, warns that its systems are rapidly deteriorating due to extremely high water usage. It urged Johannesburg and Swane residents to limit consumption to avoid system collapse, which would impact other areas.
And as we end the program, snow has been seen falling in the city of Abha, southwest of Saudi Arabia. In this short clip posted online, you can see snow plows clearing the road. You can also hear the sound of thunder in the background. Most locals say they've never seen anything like this in their lives. Snowfall is highly unusual in the country, although it can be seen in the mountains during the winter. A Saudi press agency reports that the region is experiencing a weather condition that has led to heavy rainfall along with large amounts of hail falling across all governorates and centers, causing valleys and streams to overflow. Authorities are warning citizens, however, to exercise caution while driving. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.